G'day and welcome back to Colecandoo. In today's episode, I'll demonstrate how to prepare a cut and stack imposition using both InDesign and a JavaScript I've written for this purpose. In an earlier episode, I showed several ways to make sequential numbers for use with data merge, but then touched on the issue of having several items with sequential numbers imposed on one sheet. InDesign does allow for multiple record layout output, but the layout isn't appropriate for items where the next record has to appear on the sheet underneath, rather than on the same sheet. For example, using the data from that video, let's prepare an imposition using InDesign's multiple record layout. I've prepared a 4-up imposition with the base artwork on the master page. The variable data is on the regular page, and there are only 2 items, and that will become apparent in a minute. From our data merge panel, we'll select Create Merge Document. Now I select Multiple Records from the drop-down field, and in the Multiple Record tab, I'll adjust the margins so that the next records will be placed in the correct positions. Now, when I click the Preview Multiple Record Layout checkbox, the sheet becomes populated with the next 3 records. So here and here is 9001, 9002, 9003, and 9004. This would be fine if the order of the finished products didn't matter once the items were trimmed to size, such as short-run invites. However, because the end product in this example will be invoice books, the next record should be on the sheet underneath, not the same sheet. The record should also be split at even length so that the books can be easily trimmed and assembled by bindery staff. With the imposition on screen, the next sheet underneath 9001 would be 9005. So the sheets in this invoice book will be several numbers apart. If the sheets were printed using these numbers and then cut and collated manually, that creates a lot of hand collation and can introduce human error. In this instance, the multiple record layout isn't appropriate. Ultimately, InDesign doesn't provide a cut and stack imposition as part of its data merge feature. So how is a cut and stack imposition created in Adobe InDesign? In a perfect world, the printing company would handle printing issues such as imposition, typically with dedicated imposition software rather than within InDesign. In reality, not all printers use dedicated imposition software. Even using this software can create circumstances where cut and stack impositions have so many records to process that the imposition software can't cope adequately, and it's easier to prepare a manual imposition in InDesign. That said, I've written a JavaScript that will help. It won't create a cut and stack imposition, but it will create an alternate version of the database that's more suitable for setting up an appropriate cut and stack imposition. I've created a similar file with a noticeable difference. None of the artwork is on the master page. Instead, all of the artwork is on a regular page, and the visibility of the artwork is controlled by layers. It contains base artwork, which I'll turn off, and trims, which I'll turn off. But we still have placeholders ready to take in the incoming data. So let's prepare the data for this imposition, and to do that we go to the scripts panel and run the script. I'm going to look for my data, which I know is numbers, and we have a user interface appear. In this dialog box, I'm presented with several options. The record range represents the start and end records of the original database. Records in a set refers to how many records are required to make one product. In this case, there's going to be 50. We want 50 records to each book. Sets in a stack refers to how many of these sets of 50 will fit into one stack for practical purposes, such as fitting into a mechanical guillotine or loading onto a pallet. We can have 5 sets in a stack in this example. Items on a full sheet refers to how many items are up on a printed sheet, and in this example, there are 1, 2, 3, and 4. I then have a choice of the last stack height. For now, I'll leave it at the default, and I'll explain this later in the video. We'll leave include a record number checked and click OK. A progress bar now appears, and once it's processed that, it merges the data to a new file that has the suffix cut and stack. The original data is unchanged. Unlike the original database that had one header row titled NO, we now have 5 header rows. We have record number, then No, No1, No2 and No3. The record number was added by the script, but No, No1, No2 and No3 are effectively the No database, but split into 4 different columns for the sake of the imposition. So I place my records and I now go preview. We can see the top left record is the first record, but the record on the top right is 250 numbers ahead of it. The record to the bottom left is 250 records from the record on the top right, and the records on the bottom right are 250 records from the bottom left. So as we cycle through each record, we can see that the imposition is behaving properly. That is, the next record is appearing on the sheet underneath rather than to the right. So we'll cycle through all of those. So why 250? Well, we had 5 sets of 50 sheets. So that's 250. So when we go to record 250, see 9250, 9500, 9750, 10,000. So this number here, when I go to sheet 251, should be 10,001. Let's see if it is. There we go, 10,001. So this is starting the second stack. And that's 250 apart. That's 250 from that one, and 250 from this one. So that's correct. So the script has made a database that will work with a cut and stack imposition. So now to explain what is meant by last stack in the user interface of this script. Put simply, when the total records of the database don't divide into equal size stacks, the size of the last stack can be calculated in one of 3 ways. Stack height, full set height, or optimized sheets. To understand the difference, I've created 3 databases using the different versions and will illustrate the results in Excel. The information we're going to use is 1 to 200, 10 records in a set, 5 sets in a stack, but we're going to use 3 items on a sheet rather than 4 to deliberately have an odd stack. So I've taken these results into Excel and coloured them so they're easy to see. In each instance, green represents the first full stack and yellow represents the last stack. The black border represents a set. As we look at the full stack method, we can see that the last stack has maintained the full stack size, that is, it's 50 records long. But it's very wasteful in that after record 200, there is literally 100 records that will just be blank and get thrown in the bin. If we use a full sets method, once again, records 1 to 150 are in their correct sets of 10. However, the last 50 records have been made into 5 sets that are optimized into their own sets of 10. So this has saved 30 sheets compared to the previous method. It still has some waste, but it's made it so that if the printer is printing in specific sets and then putting, say, a backing sheet, it will fall in the correct place. We then look at the last method, the optimized sheets method, and we can see the first stack is made correctly, but the last stack is quite staggered. However, it's saving sheets, but this is no good if you need to print with a backing sheet because a backing sheet will not be in the same place constantly. You would use this method if you had to maintain a reading order, but you didn't have to maintain a specific stack size or set size. You would use this for, say, short-run invitations or direct mail. Because a variable data is no longer tied to the master page, I can add as many pages as I like that in effect work as a front, a back, or even more pages. So in this example that I'm showing you now, the invoice, rather than having one side, is in fact two sheets double-sided. So this is the first sheet, this is the back of the first sheet. Notice that this contains variable data, but notice that 9004, the opposite record, is on the opposite side because it's double-sided. So be very conscious of that if you're going to use this. At the same time, I can also have a second printed page, which is also double-sided. This is something that you certainly could not do if your database was tied to the master page. That's it for another video. If you got something out of this video, show me by hitting the like button and subscribe for more great videos. Check out Colecandoo or InDesign Secrets for the latest articles, or tweet me at Colecandoo. Until next time, I'll see you later.